You're muted.
Well, what's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the How to Be an Anti-Racist Book Club. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nick P.
And I'm Rev Kev, here to engage, inform, and inspire. And if you came to do that, then I guess you're preaching to the choir.
So we want to, first of all, just thank everyone who has been throughout the entire journey through the whole book. Guess what? Tonight is the last night. It's the last night. We are on chapter, what is it? 18.
18.
I was going to say 17. We're on chapter 18, survival. So we hope that you enjoyed the journey. We certainly enjoyed having you along with us. We want you to know that you can feel free to write in the comments anything that you feel. There's nothing that is too ignorant or too unknowledgeable or too unaware. We want you to all just know that we're all in a process of learning together. Everyone has their own levels, their own wisdom, their own experiences. But we want to thank our sponsors, Gammon Theological Seminary at the Interdenominational Theological Center.
And then we would also like to thank Jackson State University, the Jackson State Wesley Foundation at the I Love Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi.
We want to also thank St. Luke United Methodist Church in Augusta, Georgia, my home church, where the Reverend Luther B. Felder is pastor.
And then I want to give a shout out to my church in Camden, Mississippi, Paul United Methodist Church.
And anyone else who is also connected with Adwin Media, LLC, which is my media company. Also Poetry Girl, Inc., LLC. Also our technical director, who is the founder of Poetry Girl, LLC. We want to thank Mashakati McKenzie. We call her Mo, or you can call her Minister McKenzie. But she's the mastermind behind all the buttons and the clicking. She's back there making sure that everything runs smoothly. But we want to thank also our guests this evening who are engaging in the conversation with us. We have Mr. Tavis Tinsley. What's up, brother?
What's up, man? Good to
What's
see
going
you.
on, my brothers? It's good to be here. It's good to be seen.
With the Dreamville, I see you.
Hey, man, May 14th.
Yeah.
And you want to introduce our next guest?
And then we have the one, the only, the phenomenal Professor Danielle Littlefield, holding it down for Russ College and Holly Springs, Mississippi, the Humanities Department.
How y'all doing?
We're good, Queen. How about you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. But if y'all have been joining the book club all the way up to this point, then you already know what time it is. It's time for the Sankofa moment. And maybe this is your first time and you're not aware of what Sankofa means. Sankofa is a West African principle that simply means to go back and fetch it. And the Adinkra symbol, which is what Sankofa is, it's a Adinkra symbol from West Africa. It's a bird that's walking forward, but it's going back to fetch something as it's moving forward. So in life, sometimes even as time moves forward and we're in life and we have things that happen, sometimes we want to just say it was in the past. But sometimes we have to go back in the past and remember some of the times where God was with us, where maybe our parents looked out for us, maybe our friends. Something happened in your past that you can always be grateful for, that you can always learn from as well. And what we are doing in our Sankofa moment here in the book club is we are going through all the chapters, all the way to chapter 18. And my genius brother, Rev Kev, is going to take us through the Sankofa moment. All right, take it away, my brother.
All right, so our how to be an anti-racist Sankofa moment. It's always important to understand whether you read it or not. This is the catch up for you. So we're going live from 1 through 17 to bring us into chapter 18. Chapter 1 dealt with definitions. Definitions are important because this lays the foundation for us to understand what the author is saying and how he's defining what he's saying, whether we agree with it or not. And in this chapter, he defines what is a racist and an anti-racist. He says a racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. He says an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Chapter 2 dealt with dual consciousness, and this pulled from W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness. And he broke this down into 3 ways. He talked about the assimilationist, which he called kind of like a progressive racist, which is one who is expressing the racist ideas that a racial group just needs to be culturally developed in more like another group, and then their problems will be alleviated. Then he had the segregationist, which sees a forever division between a superior racial group and an inferior racial group. And then you have the anti-racist, which was one who equally values the cultures of both groups or all groups. Then chapter 3 dealt with race and power. You can't talk about race without looking at the construct of social power. And he says race is a power construct of collected or merged differences that are lived out socially. Then chapter 4 dealt with biology, and he talked about biological races and how people might just look at your biology and think that you are inferior or have a smaller brain or the capacity to do something just because of your biology. Chapter 5 dealt with ethnicity, and he talked about ethnic racism being a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inequity between racialized groups and are sustained by racist ideas about racialized ethnic groups. Chapter 6, we looked at body racism, which dealt with perceiving certain racialized groups bodies as more animalistic or violent than others. Chapter 7 dealt with culture, and a cultural racist was seen as one who is crafting a cultural standard and imposing a cultural hierarchy among racial groups. Chapter 8 dealt with behavioral racism, and this was defined as one who is making individuals responsible for the perceived behavior of a racial group or making racial groups responsible for the behaviors of individuals. Chapter 9 dealt with colorism. So team light skin, dark skin, you probably heard it before. You probably talked about somebody like Drake or something. Yeah, he talked about colorism in this chapter. And he said a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inequities between light people and dark people, supported by racist ideas about light and dark. Chapter 10 dealt with whiteness, and he talked about like anti-white racist being one who is classifying people of European descent as biologically, culturally, or behaviorally inferior, or conflating the entire race of white people with racist power. And in this chapter, in the chapter of whiteness, he talked about power versus privilege to a degree. Chapter 11, he talked about blackness, and this was the chapter that we had a lot of dialogue on because sometimes we don't necessarily agree with the definitions, but this book club is not about agreeing, it's about exploring concepts. And so he talked about blackness and this illusionary concept that disempowers Black people by saying that they can't be racist because Black people don't have power. And this is where some people might define Black racism as just prejudice, but this chapter kind of broke that down by how the author saw it, and it provided great dialogue, if nonetheless. Chapter 12 focus on class, because if we're talking about race, we got to talk about power and class. He talked about a class racist being one who is racializing the classes, supporting policies of racialized capitalism against the race classes, and justifying them by racist ideas about race classes. Then chapter 13 dealt with space. And spatial racism was a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to resource inequities between racialized spaces or elimination of certain racialized spaces, which are sustained by racist ideas about racialized spaces. So when we talk about why do we support HBCUs and Black colleges and Black arts, because spaces had to be created, but we don't always want to talk about race, so those spaces get underfunded or eliminated. Space racism. Chapter 14 dealt with gender and gender racism, a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inequities between race genders and are sustained by racist ideas. Chapter 15 complemented chapter 14 because it talked about sexuality and it talked about queer racism, a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inequity between race sexualities and are sustained by racist ideas about race sexualities. Chapter 16, he talked about failure. And he talked about if we continue to make strong individuals and don't make strong policies or for equitable access, then we will continue to fail. And the definition that he kind of starts out with is, what is an activist? And he says this is one who has a record of power or policy change. Chapter 17, he talks about success and how he is defining success for why this book is even being written in the first place. And he defines success for the anti-racist is a world where power and policy support equality of opportunity for all. And so that's the Sankofa moment, 1 through 17. Whew. Let's do this. Chapter 18, survival.
Can you believe that that was our last Sankofa moment? Wow, wow, wow. So I hope that you were paying attention throughout that and kind of get some nuggets if it was your first time. So we're going to delve into chapter 18 today, which is entitled Survival. And it starts with Dr. Kennedy talking about how his wife was diagnosed with cancer, with breast cancer, and how that entire time was an era of upheaval because he had the duality of his wife's cancer, and he had all this research going on for racism. But what happened during that process of that duality of kind of turbulentness going on in his life, he had an eye-opening experience where he began to kind of rethink how he defined racism and rethink some of the ideologies that he held dear to. One of the things that he was able to kind of just sit with that offered some transformation for him was just the realization that he needed to reorient some of his research and redirect it. One thing that he had to do was he had to no longer focus on changing racist minds, and he focused on the undoing of racist policies, because he wrestled with a lot of the notions where he would say, well, racism is rooted in the things that we say and the ideas that we have, and also the policies that we create. But people would constantly ask him, so what are you doing to kind of or undo the work of racist policies? And he had to kind of sit with that and ask himself, what am I really doing? And he refocused his the direction of his studying to researching policies that were created that substantiated racist ideas and racist notions. So he eventually described racism as like a metastatic cancer, because it spreads throughout the history with dire consequences, and it takes root in the policies that we have, not just the ideas or the notions that we have, but the policies that are formed. They kind of seal the deal on racist thought. But he was the founder of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center. And that was after he had this realization that my focus needs to be on undoing the work of racist policies, not simply arguing about what I consider to be racist or anti-racist, but he wanted to focus in on what work has been done to form racist policies and to undo racist policies. But I'm just curious as to what you all's responses are. Maybe you have been confronted with with the same kind of question. What am I doing to undo racist policies, or what can I do to undo racist policies? What am I doing to combat racism? I know that's something that I especially being in a church where I'm the minority, I'm constantly faced with that question. Um, and I'm faced with often being the bridge, if you will. Um, I have mixed emotions about that, but the question I often get is, how do I undo racism? And it's not just to me, that the person may be asking about them. What can they do? Um, and so I have my own responses when I'm asked that, but what are some of the, even if you've asked yourself, what are some of your own responses?
I'll briefly say, like, so this chapter, like it showed how his personal experiences kind of like intertwined with how he saw racism, and so I did appreciate that. But I will also say, as a reader, I kind of wish that this chapter would have been the first chapter and not the last chapter. There was a lot of sectionality that he talked about leading all the way up to this chapter 18, survival. He broke it down from space to race to sex to culture. So you got to see the intersectionality of racism as he defined it. And then this chapter kind of talks about how it kind of broke down. And so for me, it kind of felt like this chapter was inversed. Like, because it kind of left me feeling like he said some things in there that I could kind of rock with, but then at the same time, I'm gonna be honest. It recently, Senator Tim Scott made a speech, and he said that America isn't racist, right? And this chapter kind of felt like we don't have to talk about it the same way. We just have to address the policies. And to say that there's not bad things or not bad people and things like that, as a believer in Christ, I'm always looking for the hope. Even when I look at the scripture, there's nothing wrong with calling out wickedness when it's there. And to be like, oh, well, it's not the people, it's just the policies. Though those two can coexist without saying one is better than the other. And in the same regard of our Sankofa moment, it kind of seemed like it was kind of like an either or. Like, now that I know how to focus on policy, having these conversations don't matter the same way. And I'm not saying that that's the author's intention, but that's kind of some of the things that I felt. This is what I felt as the reader. Like, because if I'm in a space, like it made me think in Sankofa, when I talk to my grandparents and things like that, if the law, which is policy, allowed them to be lynched, they're not talking about or not being able to go to the ballot box, them dealing with having to lose their jobs or lose their lives or lose their livelihood. Yes, the policy supported, but it was still a dialogue of having to change somebody's mind or still be able to stand firm in your personhood. And so that's like, for this chapter to be survival, surviving in racist society is kind of different. Like, yes, we do have to get to the point to where we're not just trying to change minds and policies. I do agree with that. But to deal with the reality of dealing with racism, as he kind of spelled out the intersectionality throughout the book, I wish you would have started with this chapter and not ended with it. That's how I felt as the reader.
I think you're.
Unmute yourself, Danielle.
I was gonna let somebody else jump in. The first thing that was interesting to me about this chapter is that he spent time earlier in the book discussing how he kind of asked or / confronted another speaker. I feel like it was at Temple University in Philadelphia about the metaphor of disease for racism, right? And remember, in which he said that racism was not a disease, that there was a more appropriate metaphor for what racism is. But then he ends his chapter with comparing racism to a disease. Literally, the entire chapter is an extended metaphor of that idea of racism as a disease. I think I was also maybe akin to what you were kind of getting to, Kosh, that he doesn't ever bring up in this chapter the idea of Black people surviving racism, which I'm going to just say is a missed opportunity. I'll use the phrase missed opportunity for that, right? That the real point of the chapter seems to be that America can survive racism as a nation, right? That the American system, the American society, American as an institution can survive racism if we have hope that we can beat racism, again, which he's comparing to a disease. So I think those were the kind of first things that just kind of took me aback, only because he spent time kind of being against this idea of racism as a disease. There were things here I agreed with, and then there were other things that I think need more conversation, right? Specifically the binaries, which I think is in general a large part of my overall issue with this book as a whole, is that it really depends upon binaries. And I think it's slightly problematic to try to break down a system of binaries by reinforcing other binaries. Right. So for a second, I'll maybe stop there. I want to just let somebody else jump in.
I wanted you to keep going, to be honest.
Well, I mean, so for example, I think, so for me, this is page 229, but I'm on my, my Kindle in this chapter, where he says, over time, the source of racist ideas became obvious, but I had trouble acknowledging it. The source did not fit my conception of racism, my racial ideology, my racial identity. I became a college professor to educate away racist ideas, seeing ignorance as the source of racist ideas, seeing racist ideas as the source of racist policy, seeing mental change as the principal solution, seeing myself as an educator as the primary solver. He goes on to basically say that he started to see this in the opposite way, that instead of racist ideas informing racist policy, it's instead racist policies that produce racist ideas. That sets up another binary, and it's just not true. The fact is that both things are happening at once, right? Just like we learn about energy, about light waves, about maybe time, if you believe in some sort of time travel, if you into the, the sci-fi and all of that, right? Then the idea that things travel back and forth, even how we think about life imitates art, but art also imitates life. Racist policies do come out of racist ideas. And the same way, racist ideas are then reinforced by racist policies, right? That seem to produce outcomes that reinforce the racist ideas people already have, right? So I think there's a sort of fallacy in attempting to use sets of binaries and definitions to break down a system of constructs which already put together binaries and definitions. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there for a minute.
Look here. I'm actually glad that you said that, to be honest with you, because I feel like the crux of my ministry deals within the realm of psychology. And I think what I'm hearing being described in this book is the study of epistemology, how we come about gaining knowledge in order to execute it in life. But psychology and cognition, the way we think about things and how we are fitting those things and explaining the reasoning behind those things in our lives is a problem. And the question that he is presented with, how are you making a difference in your direct surrounding community. I think from my own personal experience, being a student, again, being really steeped into the mind and the importance of the mind, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's much like a chicken and the egg scenario, which came first. And I don't think that has anything to do with the solution of the problem. But I see the importance, the thing that I do in order to resist, because I have a lot of friends who are diligent protest marchers. They hold up signs, they're, you know what I'm saying, they're at rallies. I see the struggle of Black men and Black women trying to get up in the morning, trying to conceptualize that people are outside hunting us, that we wear the weight of stigmatizations in society while we are at the same time simultaneously trying to break them. And I try to provide space for people to vent, to transform their thinking into something that will allow them to survive, and not only survive, but thrive in their environments. Because I really think that survival construct that we've been placed under as Black people, it's burning us out. And it's getting to the point to where when we're approaching anti-racism and we're approaching changing minds and or policies, we're too tired to even start. So it's my opinion.
I'm sorry. I feel like I didn't answer the question that you asked, right? Which was specifically about how we do the work of fighting racism, right? While I'm railing all about what I had a problem with in this chapter. I think one of the things I've really focused on, especially as an educator and as a writer, and I think now kind of going more heavily into this phase of my life as an editor, is in creating alternatives, right? I think one of the biggest things that has always kind of helped dismantle systems of racism in America is when just alternative options suddenly appear, right? Like if a girl at my school is having a party, I don't need to get rid of her party. I don't need to shut her party down. I just need to have a better party. That's essentially how I'm going to win at that. So, for example, I work at an HBCU, and surprisingly, maybe to some, but not to those who have worked at HBCUs, HBCUs are rife with racist policy. Right, they are rife with racist policy and kind of just a sort of suppression. You know what I mean? There's a space for Black culture to thrive, but then also still at a lot of HBCUs, there's a sort of suppression of a certain type of Black resistance and kind of ideas that are connected to that. And so I think just going into certain spaces, part of my first instinct is to just create an alternative for what people can do so that it makes that thing that is harmful obsolete, right? Nobody kind of wants to participate in it. I heard a conversation earlier today. I was listening to Amanda Seals' podcast. And she had on, I can't even remember the woman's name, but I know she is an editor for a huge fashion magazine, and she's Black, kind of their first Black editor. I feel like it's Vanity Fair, that she's at Vanity Fair now. And they were kind of talking about why is it that a lot of the most successful Black people in fashion are freelancers. And right, and I was like, well, that's an obvious idea because they don't have to work at the institution, right? Then they don't have to take a job at the actual institution. They can work on their own terms. And so it's right, doing something like that just simply creates an alternative. It makes this other thing now obsolete, right? And it eventually has to kind of start to break down once it's not being supported because it becomes less and less viable. And I think that's something we're seeing in society today, as a lot of institutions have to kind of decide now that racism is getting less and less profitable, right? Are they going to stay invested in the racism, or are they actually invested in profitability and making money and getting ahead? And I see a lot of that, right? Where they're having, where the wealthy, corporate business owning classes having to decide which one are they most invested in, profits or racism, because now those two don't always go.
I think that's a great perspective to offer a second option. That's brilliant. You gonna say something, Kev?
Yeah, like so this is coming from Daniel Black, one of the professors at ITC. Shout out to him in the emergence conference. This is one of the things that he said that kind of correlates to this. He said that tradition is the belief of the dead. He said traditionalism is the dead beliefs of the living. And when I look at this, how do we do the work of racism? Because racism happens on so many different levels, which I kind of appreciated how he defined racism on so many different ways. Whether you agree with them or not, you got to see how people have to interact, even on a personal level, with processing racism, trying to build a collective of safe spaces so that these dialogues can be had in however they take place. If you are a policy person, where is a hub for you to have those safe conversations? Because sometimes you need to do the work, and then sometimes you need to grieve. Sometimes you need to be taught. Sometimes you need to be the teacher. Come on, Ecclesiastes. There's a time and a place for everything. And a lot of times when we have these race talks, a lot of times we get set up into the position to where we have to always be the bigger person, always be the Fannie Lou Hamer. And it's like, no, sometimes I feel like DMX, y'all gonna make me lose my mind up in here. And so so how do we create safe spaces for holistic dialogue and change to take place, however that looks? And then how do we also create spaces to where we can honor the past, but we can also acknowledge the fallacies of the past, right? Like we don't just have to erase and do away with it. When we look at some cultures, looking at this chapter, it made me think about the Holocaust. Does the Holocaust be like, oh, Germany wasn't wrong at all for none of this? It's like this was a point in history, a sad point in history. We acknowledge it, we grow from it. We're never gonna forget. When we think about 9/11, we say the same thing. But when we talk about atrocities in Black communities, then it's always like this forget about it type of thing. And it's like you don't actually have to forget. And so creating, how do we do the work of racism? Creating those collectives to where we can actually talk about those things and address those things however they manifest themselves. But then we also can create spaces for co-creating together. What does better look like together?
And I love that creating spaces. I love creating another option. That second option that actually that reminds me of this conversation that I had with so it was a group of people we were having a conversation, and one of the young ladies was getting frustrated because how I see racism is I like to look beyond the pie in the sky and the fluff, you know, and the ideologies, and I look to how does it look like every day, like day to day. What's a practical way of how this thing you're saying is how it's going to show up. And what a lot of people were saying was just you need to spend time with people who are different, and we need to do ministry with people who are different. So I hear that narrative, but if we stay in the same place, if we keep doing the same thing over and over and we don't offer that other option, if we don't create our own resource, we can say, what can we do? We might have to create our own. Baby, I came from ancestors that they didn't have resources. They had to create resources. We can sit here and cry and get upset about, in white fragility and be upset about, someone speaking their truth. Or we can stop just contemplating on the issue itself, like you said it like this and you said it like this. Let's talk about how all of that, let's talk about how is it going to show up practically day to day. And one thing that I was offering for all fellow ministers and out there, one thing that if you are a church that is predominantly one particular community and you want to reach other communities, maybe it's you want to reach another generation, maybe you want to reach people who speak other languages, maybe you want to reach someone who's of a different racial group or ethnic group, you cannot just expect those people to just fall into your lap. You can't sit in a meeting with the usher board or whoever and just talk about it and expect the people to fall into your lap. You can't just say, well, we have to have worship with other people. So you have to get to the point to what is a real thing that we are going to do consistently, not just, one march or one block party. What is a consistent effort that you're going to do, like a policy that every day it's illegal for you to go out there and cut on your car engine and not put your seatbelt on and drive every day. It's not one day and one time that's illegal. That's illegal every day. And that's how policies work. You have to be consistent, find consistent strategies. And one thing that I was offering is sometimes you can go into a community that you already know is disenfranchised. One thing you can do is you can, let's say you are a church and you're looking to get more people of color or more young people, go to a school and maybe you can talk with guidance counselors or you can talk with their dean. Maybe you can offer a internship program, something where those people are walking away with a real benefit, a skill, a life lesson, as opposed to, just wanting the problem to go away. Be a source of a real avenue, a real solution that is ongoing. So that's what I got out of what he was saying.
Well, this is where I will push back on the policy piece, because in the same way, like by saying it's an either or, by the same way of saying policy is what eliminates it. Then when I create an anti-racist policy, hello, Voters' Right Act. Well, you got the Voters' Right Act and you get scholarship money and things like that. So why are y'all still complaining? You see what I'm saying? Like, so, but even if racist policies help racist ideas fester, because both of those things exist in real time together, eliminating one doesn't just eliminate the problem, but it's almost like teaching people how to cook. If I teach you how to do policy, you can create policy, and when policies change, you can create other policies. If I teach you how to be in relation with people and understand people and provide affirmation and equity to people, whether you like them or not, because it ain't about us necessarily liking you, but I'm not going to harm you or your person or deny your humanity. If I can respect your humanity, then those things, like when in the biblical perspective, when our humanness kicks in and we want to, kind of be destructive at times to ourselves or others, then we have ways to kind of get back to who we are or who God created us in God's image as. Like, because sometimes we forget that or we get lost or distracted from that. And this brings us back to that. And so yeah, I'm all for policy, like, because we don't talk about it enough. And I think that that's why this conversation is even being kind of brought out like that, because we talk about being friends so much. If y'all ever seen the play or read the play Fences, that's what like when the son is talking to the dad, you don't like me, I ain't gotta like you. I provide for you, I love you. But like he broke it down like my duty has nothing to do with my feelings. I don't necessarily care about your feelings if I have my access and my life. And so this chapter made me think about that in that way. Booker T. Washington, one of his greatest speeches, the Atlanta Compromise, like they had him and W.E.B. Du Bois kind of going back and forth at that time. But the thing about survival that I will say I get from this is that's something that has constantly happened in Black culture in Black America. Like, you have this, I'm trying to build for myself and I'm not looking for your affirmation. And then you have this, well, we can create together. And both of those things are real. So Booker T. Washington, if you look at some of his speeches, it's like, you might not necessarily agree with him, but he had a lot of momentum for Black people. But and what Dr. Kendi is saying in this book, racist policies come from self-interest. A lot of times when Black people are making progression, I have to make sure that you feel like you're not losing anything. That's what Booker T said in some of his speeches. No, we still gonna cook and clean and clean up your houses and take care of your kids. You don't lose anything. And so there's this constant struggle of, I realize that you support me and I appreciate the progress that's made. Don't go flipping out on me now and thinking that it's this. And we kind of see that consistently. And we talk about light skin, dark skin, but that's the other thing too. Like, I want to be here, but I want to create. But then there's this whole survival method of, we made so much progression here that please don't mess this up by talking too much. And so you got to calm people down and make sure that their self-interest is obtained.
So I want to just add to that as much as he focuses here on that racist policies are a result of self-interest, but racist ideas are also a result of self-interest, right? That people need to feel good about themselves. They need to feel like others are not as good as them, right? So racist ideas also come out of self-interest. And I think I feel a sort of, right, the same way you're saying, right, there's this kind of idea that once we pass a policy that alleviates some of the damage of racist policies, right, there's this kind of caveat where we have to kind of say, okay, but don't be scared, because we're not about to take everything from you. Black people can have more without you having less, which ain't true. But anyway, right, I feel the same kind of caveat is being given here when we dedicate a whole chapter to the idea that Black people aren't racist. That kind of feels like a sort of thing where I often hear white individuals express the kind of idea that Black people, like, we all are in this together, so we all have to fight it together. Well, that's not exactly what's happening here. We didn't create this problem together. We don't experience this problem in the same way. And I think that kind of idea where we are somehow equalizing the victim of racist policies, a victim of trauma, right, and racist violence, somehow this victim is of equal responsibility to fix the problem as the perpetuator. And that is kind of a problematic idea, right? I think also the conversation around that idea that he has, that Black people can't be racist, kind of conflates intraracial classism with the idea of racism. Intraracial classism is not the same thing as racism, right? So being a Black person that's like, right, I can't stand this other kind of Black person, that is not racism. It to me is intraracial classism, just like colorism is, right? We're talking about something that is more intraracial, not something that is interracial between Black and white people. Right? It's an intraracial problem. And I think it's kind of problematic to somehow try to equate intraracial issues with the larger issue at hand, because they're just simply not the same. Right? So I think some of what he's saying needs to expand. Right? It is not necessarily wrong in and of itself, but it really needs to be expanded and kind of broken apart a little bit.
I definitely agree. In that same conversation that I was having with this group of friends, I kind of experienced the same notion that you're saying, that there's a distinction between interracial and intraracial. And one thing that I also don't appreciate is when people try to also level out the oppression. So level out when someone who's white is in a context where they're the minority, and they treat that the same as a black person in society as a minority. Because this person was offering um, how this person's children and what do you call it? What is it when they're not your born child, but they marry what's that?
Stepchildren.
Stepchildren.
No, not that. So my son married a woman, and the daughter is my daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law. That's all, it wasn't coming to me. It wasn't coming to me. So she was talking about this person was talking about their her in-law children, and the other. I think this person had a daughter and a son, and they both had their own families. But both of them it's an interracial context. And this person is she's a white woman, and she was talking about how her children have interracial marriages. And she was trying to make the point that was she may say, well, yeah, my family, we don't have a lot of white or black friends in our family. When we have gatherings, and um, when they come over to our house, and we don't have a lot of other black friends, but when we go to their house, they don't have a lot of white friends. And she's trying to equate. Um, so the thing is I think what people don't understand is that um, when black people experience oppression, they find healing in community with one another. And so when people of privilege associate that community that is formed with reverse racism, that's something that I don't have any empathy for. Like, for example, when we talk about, there's a whole nother reason why in the black church it's predominantly black than when you have white churches that are predominantly white. That's for an entirely different reason. Because black people wanted to be in faith communities with white people, but they were ousted, they were rejected, and so they had to form their own faith communities. They had to be in the hush harbors and the brush harbors. There's dialogue about the difference between those. But they had to worship together in secret. They weren't allowed to congregate together openly. And so I think that there must be um, there has to be empathy for the uniquenesses of oppression, and not necessarily trying to equalize it. And then I think what we have to do, the next thing, is not necessarily just go tit and tat about the differences as well, but create equity, create lasting solutions, so that, just like how you said, Rev Kev, that we may not even talk about it the same way. You might not even really understand it, and that's okay. That's okay. Don't devalue my opinion, but we may not talk about it the same way. But as long as we get to the point to where we can offer solutions that create those opportunities where we can have dialogue. I've invited, I can't tell you how many friends I've invited to this dialogue, um, but I don't think we're all willing to do the work um, and do it consistently. I think that's where the difference happens.
If I could chime in for a little bit, I think in order to create something, I would think that, and just maybe a play on words, I would think that it would be important to be creative, um, and to be ingenuitive. I think, as Kev was talking about, how we adhere to tradition so much. I think, especially being a black youth, and a black youth that has experienced being within a black church context, um, our ability to exercise our autonomy is stifled by the construct of traditional. traditionalism, excuse me, I think that's what you said, because it's like, okay, you can only do this way. You can only achieve this goal this way. But when and to apply that to a racial construct, you can only achieve reconciliation this way. You can only achieve healthy policies that achieve equity for all people this way. And when you invite um, creatives, Black intellectuals, white intellectuals, Hispanic intellectuals, Japanese intellectuals to the same table and allow them to come from their differing scopes and just allow them to be ingenuitive within their own right. But especially here at the ITC, we study that differing perspectives are sometimes demonized, even though that like the Catholic Church use of the censer and the African use of sage, they're both incense. They both achieve a similar purpose, but due to the differing African descended background of it, it's demonized. And it's seen as invalid. It does not fit our form of traditionalism, so therefore we can't go along with that. And so many times I see that as a problem within the United States, and I think that it's a listening problem, and I think it is a miseducation problem, because it's like, okay, and I keep going back to theology, the more and more I try to get away from the school, the more and more I find myself grounded in the things that it has taught me. But when there was an instance in which we deconstruct our embedded theologies, and in my opinion, that is a very traumatic experience. You are uprooting something that has been integral to the way you look at and believe in life. It's a part of your philosophy, and now you are going to take it and you are going to uproot it. So naturally, there are theologians and people that I have run into when I'm discussing with them and helping them to, well, I call unpacking it, because when you unpack something, when you go to a hotel, you don't just throw all the clothes out. You carefully take the clothes and place them on the bed and organize them, so it is an easier and smoother process. But people sometimes have a visceral response when you touch on things that have been so embedded into the way they've done things for such a long period of time. So it's like, okay, you're helping me unpack this, but what I try to tell people when they have this visceral response, sometimes they mansplain. Well, the Bible says this. Okay, but let's look at the cultural context. Let's look at the differing voices that aren't mentioned, the women who aren't named in the text. Let's look at the text from that perspective. So this visceral response, I'm not saying, one, if you're going to give a visceral response, then be ready to receive a response that is equally as visceral, because you're not just going to mansplain. I was raised by two Black women. You are not going to mansplain me and then expect me to have the prerogative of, okay, I'm just going to sit here and listen to you. No, I have emotions, and I have a right to express those as well. But when we both come to the table and we're ready to understand and use that understand, I think it's a Japanese term called ting, and it's a listening construct that describes listening as, of course, the auditory function of hearing, but it also includes the heart and understanding. So I think that's what's needed. It's my opinion.
Go ahead, Littlefield. Go ahead. This is a good chapter, good dialogue.
I want to just add to, we talked about like creating alternatives and kind of moving away from like a kind of staunch traditionalism, right? And I think one of the things I noticed in this chapter is that first, right, we hear about the wife's cancer, and then also I think the mother's cancer, that the mother has at some point had cancer. And when he is given his cancer diagnosis, he kind of immediately says, right, that one of the things that gives him hope or allows him to see himself as a survivor is their survival, right? And I think part of one problem that we're dealing with in terms of American society, not necessarily as Black people, because I think Black people are always seeing a future for themselves, right? In some way, and we're always actively building that future as we see it. But we don't have, as a society, a model for some other society who got out of racism, right? We don't. There is no model. We can't look at our neighbor and say, oh, well, my neighbor survived or my sister survived, so there's no reason for me to think that I won't survive. We don't have that as a nation. There is no other nation for us to look at their model for how they managed to beat racism, dismantle racism, and move on to something new. There isn't one, right? So it is something we're having to figure out how to have hope, right? And what it is we're having hope for, right? And I think one of the most interesting things about that, as it kind of relates to this chapter and just in general, is that for America to have that hope, they have to look to Black people, because Black people are the only model for this is how we can be in this situation and see a way out of it. There is no other model except for Black people, period. And that is true across the planet Earth, not just in America, right? So there's a reason why I remember when I was graduating college, and a lot of my friends who had majored in English, especially a lot of us who done like women's studies and were really studying critical race theory, everybody was telling us you should go to China and teach, because they really want like Black people there to teach English, because as they developed, and I think we can see this now with the Stop Asian Hate movement that is happening now, that as they were trying to build a model for how do we get away from these racist ideas, how do we get from under this oppression, the only people they could look to was Black people. There is no other model. And so I think that some of this, right, when you said like this was kind of inverted, this chapter maybe should have been at the front, I think there's a certain factor, a certain kind of thing about this chapter itself, or this thinking that is slightly inverted, right? Because Black people here aren't the ones we are trying to figure it out, but essentially we are the ones who are like that first cancer victim that can show you, okay, this is how we managed to survive. This is how we managed to see through. This is how and everybody looks to us as that model. That is something we can kind of see every day as other groups of color try to dismantle the racism and oppression, right, that controls their lives. There was something else I wanted to say in response to something that you said earlier, but it doesn't want to come to me now. So I'll have to for another day.
So we're coming up to time. These are always great dialogues. So the last two were really good, but we do recognize that we're coming up on time. One of the things that I wanted to read from this chapter that really kind of encompassed what this chapter was about to me, and how he defined his cancer with also looking at racism. He talked about denial is, this is on page 235 from the hard copy. He says, denial is much easier than admission, than confession. I have cancer, the most serious stage of cancer. Cancer is likely to kill me. I can survive cancer against all odds. My society has racism, the most serious stage. Racism is likely to kill my society. My society can survive against all odds. And so that really stood out to me. And so when we talk about justice, there's many different ways to not just break down racism, but justice, because people are looking for different things and there's different ways to approach it. So there's 4 types of racism briefly that we can look at. You can look at procedural justice. And this is, or let's start with distributive justice. Who gets what and how? Procedural justice defines the policies. And this is what he's talking about. He's talking about procedural justice. Restorative justice deals with there has been a grievance made, and now we're trying to do something. And then you have punitive justice. Because you did wrong, you need to be punished. Some people are saying we are looking for punitive justice because this shouldn't have happened. Yes, you can look for punitive justice and restorative justice and distributive justice and procedural justice. We could benefit by creating a capacity of knowing what type of justice we're asking for. Just like in the Methodist Church, we have this thing called the quadrilateral, so we can see where exactly on the spectrum we're looking at. I can look at scripture, I can look at tradition, I can look at reason, and I can look at my experience. And all of those can work in tandem with each other. When I'm looking at my reason, I can talk about the theories. I can talk about the history. When I talk about my experience, I can talk about what it is to wake up in a racist society and want to dream of an anti-racist society, but not get caught in the nihilism of this might not probably going to happen in my lifetime. The tradition of how people had to be innovative, but because they have been disenfranchised in so many different ways, we have to almost look to tradition to survive while creating new traditions, right? And then the scripture, those things that are beyond us that keep us rooted when we don't have a playing field or we don't have a roadmap. So there's all these different ways that we can look at it, and we can develop a capacity of intelligence so that we can address those things in tandem for what they are, where they are, when they are.
Well, it's time for the benediction, Reverend. You want to go on and take over? I'm in the throne room right now. I can't even do it.
So if you would like to support the ITC, you could just go on the website and put your offering there. We have Brother Tavis, who's a college. You could give him a scholarship. Come on now. You got to support your HBCUs.
Yeah, Nick P need a scholarship too, Doc.
Amen.
Well, y'all, I'm just so grateful to, just make light of, such a visceral topic. It's a topic that is layered. It's intersectional. It's layered with so many emotions, with joy, with laughter, with jokes, with anger. And I think the bravery comes with not just talking about it, but being able to deal with those layers of emotions and sit with them, and sit with truth. People, there's some people, if you can't sit with their truth, they don't want to have no conversation just to make you feel better. And you don't have to be okay with that. If you really want if you really want that not restorative justice. What justice is it? Reconciliation justice.
Yeah, you have restorative justice. Yeah, restorative justice, procedural justice, distributive justice, and punitive justice.
That's heavy right there. That's heavy. So we're trying to get justice in 4 ways, in 4 degrees. So we hope that you were empowered by this book club. Please, if you haven't gotten the book, it's The How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And we want you to know also you can get the workbook. If you want to engage in that conversation with your staff at work, with your church, with your Bible study. And also they have this little handy dandy study guide that it unpacks some analysis for you and summarizes it. So in case there's you may think that it went over your head a little bit, this will help kind of unpack it for you. And another thing is engage in dialogue. Go through the process of learning with a community. And there's always going to be something that you didn't see, that you didn't know, that's going to help you in your journey. Start talking about what are some efforts that you, your community, your loved ones can do in an ongoing way, not just a march. Don't just do a march. Please don't just do a march. Don't just buy a Black Lives Matter shirt and call that. Don't do that. Find a real effort that you can partake in, and just grow in that one effort. Let it transform you. Let the community transform you. Form relationships in that. Maybe there's someone that, hey, they need a scholarship, or maybe They may bless you in that process, but just do one thing consistently and form a relationship in that. And we hope that this was a seed. Um, I'm your boy, your boy Nick P, the guy with the beard, one of your co-hosts.
And it's your boy Rev Kev, here to engage, inform, and inspire. And if you came to do that, then we preaching to the choir.
So thank you again, Danielle Littlefield. And thank you again, Tavis Tinsley, for being a part of our final episode of the How to Be an Anti-Racist Book Club. And we hope that you all have a great weekend and stay blessed. Peace.